You're listening to old Western stories, where dust settles slow, guns speak loud, and every tale rides straight into your imagination. Hit that subscribe and saddle up, the ride's just startin'. The scream didn't sound human. It cut through the dusk sharp and sudden, snappin' the prairie calm. Clara Eaton dropped the kettle she was rinsing by the fire, the tin clatterin' over stone, and turned toward the wagons just as Walter hollered her name. He had the rifle, she had nothing. Another scream, then a whoop, long, high, and fierce. Horses thundered through camp before her breath could catch, painted riders burstin' from the tree line. Fire arrows hissed through the air. The canvas of the Miller wagon went up in seconds. Clara froze, couldn't scream, couldn't move. Walter fired once, missed. A second shot cracked off behind her, maybe Ezra, the old trapper. Then silence, broken only by hooves and dying men. She ducked behind the supply wagon, skirts catching on a wooden plank. Smoke poured past her. A man screamed close. One horse came crashing through the fire, hooves sparking. Then she saw Walter again. He stumbled backward into the open, blood bloomin' at his side. He turned to run to her, but a Comanche warrior closed the gap in 2 strides and dropped him with a tomahawk. Clara watched him fall. She bolted, didn't get far. A hand yanked her back by the hair. She hit the dirt hard, dust filling her mouth. Kicked, clawed, didn't matter. A boot pressed down on her. Breath left her. Voices barked. One sharp and short. The weight lifted. She turned her head, coughing. The man who grabbed her was standing, scowling, toward someone off to the side. Another Comanche stepped in, young, bare-chested, hair tied with red cloth, no paint. He said something low, pointed at Clara. The older one spat, backed off. The young one looked down at her, just looked, no smirk, no threat, then walked off. She was hauled to her feet, rope bit tight into her wrists, tied fast to a pony's flank. They rode out hard, leaving fire behind. She didn't scream, just tasted ash in her throat and watched her husband disappear into smoke. Night came cold. They stopped in a low cut where wind whistled through rock. They tied her to a cedar post away from the fire. She could barely sit. Her hands were numb, her lip cracked and dry. She lifted her eyes. The young warrior stood a few yards off, speaking to another man. The others laughed, chewed meat past a jug. Some looked her way, long and slow. One got up, started toward her, didn't rush, just took his time. She pressed back against the post. The young one moved, no shout, no fight. Just stepped in the man's path and stopped. They stared, said a word or two. The other man turned away. The young one looked at her once, just once, then turned his back. She sat there, breath caught high, heart slammin'. She was still alive. Because of him. The ride was long and rough, all bone and ache and dust. Clara's wrists were tied tight to the side strap of the pony, the rope cut in deeper with each jolt. Her arms went numb, then burned, then numb again. The pony wasn't meant for passengers and sure didn't care it was carrying one. Her knees banged the saddle horn, her back bent wrong, her mouth dry as old bark. They didn't stop for food, barely stopped for water. Just kept ridden, sun beaten down like a curse, wind whipping her hair into her eyes. She couldn't cry, her body wouldn't spare the water. Her head lolled once and smacked the saddle frame, woke her right up. The men rode in silence mostly, not like they were ignoring her, more like she didn't count. A thing tied down. She swayed with the rhythm, jaw clenched, teeth chattered from the shock her body was going through, even under that blistering sun. At one point her vision swam and the world tilted sideways. She thought she might fall, but the pony kept her pinned against the saddle. Her shoulder throbbed with every step. That night they stopped in a narrow draw choked with brush and stone. No fire. Just cold air and low murmurs between men who didn't seem eager to sleep. She was dragged from the pony and dumped by a boulder, hands still bound. Her legs didn't work right. She tried to move, but the pain set her teeth on edge. They left her there. A shape passed close, one of them. She flinched, but he just spit near her and walked on. The cold crept in slow, mean, and patient. It worked through her dress and into her bones, the kind of cold that comes without snow or storm, just open sky and dry wind cutting down from the high ground. Her fingers felt like sticks, useless and swollen. The rope around her wrists had rubbed the skin raw, and she couldn't shift without it feeling like fire. Her lips were split, her tongue heavy. Somewhere behind her the men talked low, laughed once. A rough, ugly sound, then footsteps. One set common toward her. She tensed. Couldn't move, couldn't fight, but her breath caught and her back pressed hard against the stone. The steps stopped. A pause. Then something dropped beside her, heavy and soft. She turned her head slow. A blanket, worn, wool, smelled of sweat and horse. The young warrior stood just beyond reach, eyes on her. Not pitying, not cold either. Just watching, like a man setting a stone where it needs to be. He didn't speak, didn't wait. Just turned and walked back to the others. She stared at the blanket, didn't trust it, didn't trust him. But her teeth were knocking, and her skin felt like it'd tear if the wind hit it wrong. She eased onto her side, hissing through her teeth, and dragged it over her best she could. It was warm, not enough to fix things, just enough to keep her from slipping away. She didn't sleep, not really. Every sound made her eyes snap open. Every shadow looked like a threat. And the worst part was not knowing why. Why was he protecting her? He'd stopped that one man back at the first camp. Now he gave her warmth when no one else would, but he hadn't cut her loose. Hadn't spoken a word. Was she safe, or just bane saved for later? The question spun in her head, too loud for sleep. She watched him through the dark. He sat with the others but apart. Spear laid across his knees, eyes never far from where she was. A few of the men glanced his way now and then. Not friendly, not curious, like he'd broken some rule. The fire stayed cold that night, but Clara felt the heat of something else risen, not from the coals but from the air between them all. Something tense, something ready to snap. They broke camp before the sky even stirred. No breakfast, no talk, just the sound of leather straps pulled tight, horses snorting in the cold, and boots crushing dry grass. Clara's arms were stiff, her hands swollen from the rope cinched too long, her shoulders burning with every breath. One of the older men yanked her upright by the elbow, not gentle, not cruel, just efficient, and she gritted her teeth but didn't cry out. The young warrior watched from his mount, sitting tall and still, his face jiven nothing away. She was tied again to the same pony, and the ride started rough and stayed that way, the trail mean and crooked, her body rattling against the saddle like a loose board on a wagon. Her eyes stung with grit, the sun came up red behind a bank of dust, and her dress clung in all the wrong places, soaked with sweat and dirt rubbed into the seams. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, her stomach gnawing at itself. Once she tried to speak, to ask for water, but no sound came, her throat too dry, and the wind answered instead, whipping past her ears like a curse. Midday they crested a low ridge and paused, and below in a shallow bend of cottonwoods sat a small camp, trade blankets strung between poles, smoke curling from 2 cook fires, men on foot, 2 with rifles. Not Comanche, Mexicans maybe. Traders by the look of their gear, mules loaded heavy, brass pots clinking, and Clara felt something tighten in her gut. The warriors didn't ride down right away, the air holding its breath while the young one argued low with the older warrior who'd spit at her before, gestures sharp and fast. The others shifted in their saddles, tension stretched thin as wire. Then they moved, down the slope into the trader camp, slow and deliberate. Clara's pony followed, forced along by the rope tied to the man ahead. The traders stood, one raised a hand, the Comanche dismounted, all but him, the young one. He stayed on horseback, eyes fixed on her. Goods were shown: tobacco, powder, iron tools, but then came talk she couldn't follow, names, gestures, and a paper held up. One of the traders pointed at her, then laughed that low, greasy laugh. The older warrior nodded toward her, and the trader stepped forward, real casual-like, his hand brushing the pistol at his waist, his eyes weighing her like stock. Clara's skin crawled. The young warrior spoke, loud, cutting the air like a shot. Everyone stopped. The trader smirked, said something in Spanish. The other Comanche stayed still, but not the young one. He swung down from his horse, strode forward slow and straight, no blade drawn but no peace in his step neither. He stood between Clara and the trader, just there, solid, without so much as a word. The trader's grin faded, his hand hovered near his belt, but the young warrior didn't move, didn't give ground. The older warrior snapped something harsh. The young one didn't flinch. The trader spat, muttered, and turned away, deal broken. The Comanche gathered their things, and Clara was shoved back onto her pony rougher than before. They left the camp without another word. By nightfall they stopped in a box canyon, narrow and sheltered, easier to guard, harder to escape. The mood was darker now, men looking at the young one, not friendly, not curious, but like he'd crossed a line. One muttered and shook his head, another chewed on the thought of trouble. She felt it, the shift, knew it plain. He wasn't just protecting her anymore, he was defying them, and that meant danger for both. They tied her to a bent cedar stump at the canyon wall. No blanket, no water, no kindness. The young one sat alone near the edge of the firelight, back to the others, spear across his lap, his jaw tight, shoulders rigid, and he hadn't looked her way since the trader camp. She wanted to hate him, wanted to trust him, wanted to ask why, but said nothing. The cold came back with the wind, sharper now, cutting her through. She leaned her head against the stump and closed her eyes just for a moment, then she heard it, a whisper of movement, too soft, too wrong. She opened her eyes and saw two shapes near the pack horses, not Comanche, strangers, one holding a blade, the other pointing toward the canyon wall, toward her. She drew breath to scream but froze. The young warrior was already moving. The strangers moved quick, shadows cut against the canyon wall, blades low, steps sure, and Clara's breath caught high in her chest. Rope bitten her wrists as she twisted against the cedar stump, wanting to shout but fear locking her throat tight. The youth didn't hesitate. He rose from the fire's edge, spear in hand, and closed the ground with the quiet fury of a catamount. The first man never saw him. One thrust to the gut, a grunt, then the stranger folded to his knees. The second swung wild, knife flashing. But the Comanche sidestepped, caught his wrist, and drove the spear butt into his jaw, bone cracking like dry wood. The man going down hard, scrambling in the dust, then limping for the canyon mouth, gone into the night. The camp woke in a storm. Warriors leapt to their feet, hands on weapons, eyes darting between the dead intruder and the youth standing over him. Words flew sharp and fast, a tongue she didn't know but didn't need to, for the anger in it was plain. One pointed at the settler woman, then at the body, then spit, another shouted, hand hovering near his bow, while her protector answered low, steady, refusing to move aside, his spear tip planted in the dirt, his shoulders rigid as stone. Dust swirled in the firelight, the smell of iron thick, the taste of it on her tongue, and she watched the circle close, the canyon walls echoing the rise of voices, each sound heavy as falling rock. The old warrior stepped forward, the one with lines carved deep into his face, and his hand rose high like he meant to strike her, but the youth shifted, placed himself between them, no more than a pace away, and the old man froze, eyes narrowing with hate. For a long breath the canyon felt like it might split, silence broken only by the hiss of the fire and the rasp of steel against leather as a bowstring was touched. Then he lowered his hand, turned sharp, barked an order, and the others pulled back, grumbling, watchful but back. The body was dragged into the shadows, leaving a trail dark on stone, the air heavy with dust and blood. The camp settled but not easy, and the settler woman sat bound, heart hammering, her protector's glance brushing her once before he returned to his post, still alone, still silent, while the night stretched long. Coyotes called from the rim above, men muttered in uneasy sleep, and her mind churned on the same question. Why? Why did this Comanche stand between her and his own people? Was she a burden, a bargain, or a vow he couldn't break? She thought of Walter, the way he dropped in the dust and grief bit deep, but alongside it came something heavy and uncertain, tied to the man who kept her alive when others would have let her die. By dawn the camp packed in silence, the air thick as storm clouds too heavy to break, and they rode out of the canyon into open country, the land stretching bare. She swayed on her pony, every bone sore, but her eyes stayed fixed on him. The youth ridden near the front, shoulders straight, carrying the weight of more than a spear. By midday they reached a stream cutting through the flats, shallow but quick, and the band stopped to water horses. For the first time she was untied, her arms dead weight as they pulled her down, and she stumbled to her knees at the bank, plunged her face into the water, drank until her stomach cramped, cold rivulets running down her chin into her torn dress, near weeping at the feel. When she looked up, he was there across the stream, eyes steady, not cold, not soft, just steady. One barked at him, pointed her way, but he didn't move, didn't speak. The tension snapped again when the old warrior strode up, voice sharp, arm raised to strike her for lingering, and she froze, certain the blow was common. But her protector stepped through the stream, quick as thunder, catching the old man's wrist midair. Silence fell, stone holding its breath, the smell of wet earth and iron tang thick, and the old man's eyes blazed against the youth's jaw set tight, his stance rooted. Blood felt close, hers or theirs or his, but after a beat the old man jerked free, spat on the ground and stalked away, mutters dark behind him. The Comanche didn't answer, just turned, gestured she rise, and tied her once more, not rough but firm, his hands lingering like a man measuring rope, not flesh. They rode on, and she felt the weight of every stare on her back. She wasn't just a captive now, she was a spark sitting in dry tinder, one breath away from setting the whole camp ablaze, and as they moved through the flats she caught the old warrior's glare burning, like flint struck to steel, a promise that fire was common, and soon. The ride tightened like dry wire, every mile turning the air meaner, men glancing at the settler woman as if she were a thorn stuck deep, glancing at the youth as if he'd put it there. Dust rode up from the hooves and hung in their throats. Leather creaked, ropes rasped, and the only soft thing left was the silence before someone decided to break it. Clara felt each stare prick her skin, felt the pull of the rope biting at her wrists, felt the cold weight of dawn even when the sun stood high, because the day itself seemed to hold its breath. The Comanche kept a tight line, the old warrior ridden, near the back with his jaw set like rock, eyes fixed on her protector's shoulders. Toward evening they swung into a basin ringed with stone, short grass kicked bare by wind. A lone cedar crouched against a wall like a lookout. The band made a circle without a word. Clara was pulled down and fixed to a stake near the cedar, hands bound front so she could kneel, ankles crossed with a short lead to keep her from running. The youth stood just beyond, spear in hand, face steady, not looking at her, not looking away. The old man stepped into the center, voice carrying, even without a shout, and though she couldn't read the words, she knew their shape. He slapped his palm, pointed to the trader road, swept his arm toward the canyon behind them, then jabbed the air at Clara like she was the cause, the rot, the trouble that brought knives in the dark. Men grunted. A bowstring thrummed once, a warning note. Her protector answered calm, a few short lines, then planted the spear butt in the dirt, a vow without a prayer. A murmur rolled the circle. Someone kicked dust. The old man walked slow toward the youth and drew a long knife, edged dull with light. He tapped that edge against his own chest, then pointed to Clara. The meaning was iron plain. Blood wants blood. The Comanche youth did not step aside. He lifted the spear, lowered the point, and set his feet. The basin shrank until it was only stone, dust, and breath. Clara's mouth tasted of metal and smoke, though no fire burned. The old warrior came first, sudden and low. Steel flashed, the spear checked, turned, scraped along the knife with a hiss that set her teeth on edge. They circled, scuffing grit into a pale cloud that stung the eyes. The smell of iron rose sharp, not from blood yet, but from the memory of it, the way it waits for a chance. A younger rider tried to slide in close, eager to end it, bow half drawn. Clara saw him more than she thought, and without meaning, till she shifted her knees and kicked hard at the stake, toppled herself into the line of his aim. The boy's arrow wavered. A hand from behind smacked his bow aside. A curse bit the air. The old man lunged in that beat, knife angling for ribs, and the youth met him shoulder to shoulder. Leather cracked, bone thudded. The spear haft snapped along the old man's forearm and split the skin. The return stroke cut the youth's bicep shallow and bright. They shoved apart, both breathing heavy, dust sticking, to sweat so they looked stitched from the basin itself. The circle tightened. Clara's mind clawed for choices, flee, fight, beg, and found only one that didn't taste like ash: trust. The word sat heavy as a stone in the mouth, but it didn't move when she pushed at it, so she let it sit. The youth glanced once her way in the next pass, a flick low enough only she would catch, and she knew he was counting on her to hold. The old man spun with a feint, came high, then low. The spear slid, trapped his wrist for a heartbeat. The youth stepped in, shoulder drove the air from the old man, knee found sand. Knife spat from his grip and skittered to a stop within Clara's reach. She could have taken it. She could have sawed rope and run blind into scrub and night, left them to tear each other apart. Instead, she hooked the knife with bound hands, dragged it close, and pushed it back into the fight with the toe of her boot. The old warrior saw that choice as clear as sky. Rage took him, not wild but cold. He surged at her protector barehanded, meaning to end it with weight and hate, and for a moment they locked silent, Boothiel's grinding stone, muscles strung tight, faces close enough for breath to mix. The youth shifted his stance, twisted, and brought the spear shaft hard across the old man's neck, dropping him to one knee. He could have finished it then. He didn't. He struck the ground beside that weathered skull, the wood of the haft splitting, rock with a crack like thunder, and held the point on the old man's throat, a line of dust shivering along the edge. The band's breath left as one. No war whoop, no cheer. Just that big quiet when men realize the shape of their road has changed. The old warrior lifted his eyes slow, pride still living there, and waited for what came. The youth stepped back, laid the spear flat, then drew his own blade and sliced a streak across his palm, held it high so all could see, and let the blood fall to the dirt between him and the circle. A mark, a cost paid, an answer. Whatever he said then was short and final. The elders, two men who hadn't spoken the whole time, nodded once. The old man stood, fury banked but not gone, and turned his shoulder as if to cast the youth clear of their fire. Exile. The word didn't need speaking. Clara's heart stuttered. The youth came to her stake, cut her loose with 3 quick pulls, then put the knife in her hands and the lead rope in his. He didn't look at her long, just enough to say what words couldn't. Ride. The band parted like grass to let a wind through. A few spat in the dust. None drew steel. The old man's stare raked them both, flint on steel, a promise for another dawn. They mounted and rode out under a sky gone pale with morning, leather creaking and dust lifting soft as breath. And when the basin's rim gave them one last look back, Clara turned and saw the circle small and far, the lives she'd been pushed through shrinking to a speck on the flats. She faced forward. The air smelled of horse and iron and the cold edge of dawn. Her wrists burned, but the rope lay slack across her lap. Survival and loyalty had settled in the same saddle, and the Comanche who chose exile over blood set their trail with a quiet she'd learned to trust. You've been riding with old Western stories. If the tale hit your mark, give it a like, drop a comment about your favorite part, and ring that bell so you don't miss the next trail we ride. Don't forget, hit that subscribe so you're always in the saddle, and you'll always be ready when the next story rides in.